Every country in the world is in debt. The United States now carries over $38 trillion, the highest level in its history. The European Union holds roughly $14 trillion in debt. Japan is close to $9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia, or export powerhouses like Germany and China, owe enormous sums. But here's the paradox. If everyone is in debt, who exactly is the creditor? This is Coin Chronicle, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is as simple as it seems. Debt is more than a burden. It's the architecture of the modern world. Every war, every crisis, every boom and bust stands on an invisible spine of IOUs. And if you follow the thread of creditors far enough, you notice something unsettling. The world doesn't really owe money to any single someone. It owes it to itself. But that doesn't mean everyone benefits equally. Today, global debt is over $315 trillion, nearly 3 times the size of the world economy. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to the beginning. Centuries before the first credit card payment or digital transfer, the idea of national debt wasn't born on Wall Street. It was born in war. In 1694, England was fighting France and running out of gold. The king turned to the merchants of the day for help. In exchange for a permanent stream of interest payments, secured by future tax revenues, they financed the crown. To manage this new arrangement, the Bank of England was created. It was revolutionary. The state could now spend money it didn't yet have. And in return, lenders received something priceless. A promise from the government. A promise that could be traded and transferred. That was the birth of the government bond. The first seed of the modern financial system. France copied it. The Netherlands built on it. The newly independent United States adopted it to fund its revolution and later its expansion westward. National debt became not a symbol of failure, but a measure of credibility. The ability to borrow became the ability to rule. Kingdoms once fought to extract gold. Now they issued bonds to extract interest. The battlefield turned into a balance sheet. Fast forward 3 centuries, and debt has become the world's most widespread and most powerful export. The United States owes $38 trillion. Japan owes over $9 trillion. And global debt grows by the equivalent of $1 trillion every 100 days. Every country borrows, every bank lends. Citizens, through taxes, savings, and pension funds, become both debtors and creditors at the same time. But the real question remains: who's on the other side of the debt? Let's start with the United States, because America's debt isn't only a national issue, it's a global one. Total debt is approaching $38 trillion. Roughly half of it isn't just internal accounting between government agencies. It's owed directly to investors. About 2/3 of those investors are American: banks, pension funds, investment and insurance companies, and the U.S. central bank itself, the Federal Reserve. The remaining third, around $9 trillion, is held abroad. The largest foreign holder is Japan, leading with about $1 trillion, followed by China with around $800 billion. Then come the United Kingdom, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people say the U.S. is in debt to China, that isn't entirely wrong, but it's only a small piece of the truth. Because only about 2% of America's total debt is held by China. Most of it is owed to America. The Treasury issues bonds. Banks and funds buy them. Often the Federal Reserve steps in, buys them back, and injects new dollars into the system. Americans pay taxes. Those payments become interest. and that interest flows back into pension funds and savings accounts. Step back, and the picture becomes clear. It's a closed loop. The debt is real, but the creditor is often just another reflection inside the same system, like an economy staring into a circular mirror. And this loop isn't uniquely American. It operates globally. Japan lends to the U.S. through treasury bonds. The U.S. extends credit to Europe through the IMF. Europe finances developing countries through the World Bank. Those countries then lend back to advanced economies by holding foreign exchange reserves in Western bonds. The result resembles a worldwide game of hot potato, except what's being passed around isn't a potato, but promises. Every country holds someone else's IOU. Every promise is backed by another promise. It's like a poker table where the chips in every player's stack were borrowed from the player next to them. The only rule keeping the game alive is that nobody stands up. But there's another layer at the table, perhaps the most powerful of all, the markets themselves. Behind every government bond stands an invisible web of institutions, hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks. They are the real arbiters of credit. They decide which countries can borrow at low rates and which must pay a premium just to stay afloat. When that confidence disappears, currencies lose value, governments fall, and entire economies can be rewritten overnight. Ballots decide who governs, markets decide who survives, and the modern high priests of this system are the central banks, the ultimate market makers. Central banks don't merely manage debt, they produce it. When the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys a government bond, it creates new money in exchange. What is a liability on one balance sheet becomes an asset on another. Every dollar in circulation corresponds to a debt written somewhere else. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Every coin, every banknote, every digital dollar carries an invisible promise, an IOU, embedded in its surface. For decades, the force that kept this system alive was trust. As long as investors believed governments would at least keep paying interest, even if the principal was never fully repaid, the machine kept turning. But what happens when trust breaks? We've seen the consequences again and again. In 2010, Greece's sovereign debt became unpayable. Bondholders panicked. Yields spiked. The European Central Bank and the IMF intervened. But the price of rescue was austerity, higher taxes, spending cuts, and widespread unemployment. For an entire generation, bailout became another word for sacrifice. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a national curse. In Sri Lanka, the government ran out of foreign currency, fuel shortages spread, and political collapse followed. When the system breaks, creditors suddenly become visible. The IMF, credit rating agencies, anonymous bondholders, the hands that can hold entire nations by the throat. And yet, even after collapse, the story doesn't change. Old debts are replaced with new ones, burdens are redesigned, the balance sheet stays the same, only the name changes. The machine is restarted inside the same system. Because in the 21st century, debt isn't designed to be paid off. It's designed to be rolled over, renewed, and carried forward. Today, governments don't truly have a plan to eliminate their debt, neither in the short term nor the long term. That's not a conspiracy theory, it's policy. When individuals borrow, they are expected to repay the principal. But for states, the rules work differently. Debt is not treated as a one-time burden, but as a mechanism that is continuously renewed. New bonds are issued to retire old ones. That is exactly what economists call refinancing. In this system, the real product isn't the debt itself, but interest. the price of stability, almost like rent. And the global economy has become dependent on that rent. Like a system that sinks the moment it stops moving, it has to keep moving to stay afloat. The global financial system today depends not on repayment, but on the preservation of confidence. The United States will never fully pay off its $38 trillion debt. Instead, it will refinance it continuously. Japan has been rolling over its debt for decades. Its debt-to-GDP ratio has exceeded 250%, and yet bond yields remain near zero. Investors aren't waiting to be repaid. They're waiting for the deal to be renewed. Why? Because sovereign debt is still the safest collateral in existence. A U.S. Treasury bond is not viewed as a burden, but as an asset, the foundation of global finance. Pension funds hold it. Banks use it as collateral. Central banks treat it almost like money. The system relies on governments never paying off their debt completely. Because if they did, the world would lose its safest financial instrument. Imagine Washington paying off every last dollar of its debt. Banks and investment funds would instantly lose their most stable asset. The dollar supply would shrink, deflation would take hold, and economic collapse would begin. Paying off the debt would, in effect, shut down the engine that keeps the economy running. That's why governments do the opposite. They issue more debt, not randomly, but carefully, systematically. Debt becomes the heartbeat of capitalism, felt in every pension fund, every mortgage, every market. That's why when politicians talk about balancing the budget or reducing the national debt, they often sell an illusion. The goal is not to eliminate debt, but to keep it sustainable, serviceable, and desirable enough that the system continues to want it. Because once trust breaks, the numbers stop mattering. When confidence collapses, interest rates surge, and an economy built on rolling debt can unravel overnight. That is the true foundation of sovereign debt. The plan was never to pay it back. The plan is to keep the world, believing it will be paid back. It's a closed loop of trust. And as long as that trust holds, the numbers can stretch indefinitely. But trust is not distributed equally. Saying we owe it to ourselves is only half true. Interest payments do not circulate fairly through society. They flow upward, from taxpayers and workers to institutions and investors who hold the debt. Debt is not only a transfer between countries, it is also a transfer between classes. That's why global indebtedness and global inequality rise together. The system rewards those who own debt and pressures those who pay it. If this feels familiar, the reason is simple. It's the same story, only the scale has grown. A cycle that stretches from war to nations and from nations to the planet. Creditors are not villains, and debtors are not simply victims. They are two sides of the same engine. The real danger is what happens when the engine runs out of fuel, when new borrowing can no longer keep up with the promises already made. That's when the question, who is the creditor, stops being abstract and becomes personal. Because at the top of this global pyramid, there isn't a single face to blame. Not Japan, not Wall Street, not the IMF, everyone, and us. The modern financial system turned debt into money. Governments issue it, banks multiply it through credit, investors trade it, and people depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor has blurred beyond recognition. Debt once meant chains. Today it means balance. But if that balance ever wavers, if confidence fractures, the illusion ends, and we remember what debt really is, a promise that cannot be kept forever. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe and like. History is full of answers, and I'll show you where to find them.